Have you ever been in a place that just felt wrong? Not scary, like a haunted house at a carnival. I mean a real place. A part of a park, or an old street, or a patch of woods. A place where the air feels heavy and the silence feels loud. A place that makes the little hairs on your arms stand up for no reason at all. Most of us feel that little warning sign inside us, like a quiet alarm bell, and we listen to it. We turn around, we walk a little faster, and we go back to where we feel safe. This is a story about 4 friends who heard that alarm bell, and they chose to ignore it. This is a story about rules, not the kind of rules your parents or teachers give you. These are old rules, the kind that places themselves have. And the forest in this story, Black Hollow Forest, had 3 main rules. They were very simple. 1, don't go in after dark. 2, don't go in during winter. 3, and the most important one, never, ever bring a camera. A camera, you see, is a trap for moments. It catches them and holds them. And sometimes it catches things that were never meant to be seen again. But in December of 2022, 4 friends decided those rules were not for them. They weren't scared. They were excited. They had a YouTube channel and they wanted to make a video about old legends and haunted places. They thought it was all just a game. So they packed their bags with snacks and warm clothes. They charged their camera batteries all the way to full, and just as the sun was beginning to set, they walked into the forest. And their camera, it recorded everything. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand who these 4 friends were, because who they were is a big part of why this story ends the way it does. Think of them like characters in a play, each with a part to perform. First, there was Sarah. Sarah was the leader of the group. She was smart, she was brave, and she always had to be right. If someone told her story, her first thought was to prove it was fake. To her, ghosts and legends were just silly tales for little kids. She thought the stories about Black Hollow were made up by the townspeople to scare tourists. She wasn't going into the forest to find a ghost. She was going in to prove there wasn't one. That was her goal, to win. Next was Mia. Mia was Sarah's best friend, but she was the complete opposite. Mia was quiet. She was the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. The way the wind sounded, the way the shadows looked. She had read all the stories about Black Hollow online. Stories about hikers who went in and never came out. Stories about strange sounds and missing pets. And unlike Sarah, Mia believed them. A part of her was truly terrified to go, but her loyalty to Sarah was stronger than her fear, and that would be a terrible mistake. Then there was Dan. Dan was the tech guy. He was in charge of all the equipment, the cameras, the microphones, the lights. He loved facts and numbers. He believed that everything in the world could be explained by science. If you couldn't measure it or record it, it wasn't real. He came along to make sure they got great-looking video and perfect sound. He thought the forest was just a collection of trees and dirt. He had his gear to protect him. He thought his technology was stronger than any old story. And finally, there was Tyler. Tyler was the class clown. He was the funny one. Whenever things got too serious, he would make a joke or do something silly to make everyone laugh. He used his humor like a shield. He thought that if he could laugh at something, it couldn't hurt him. He joked about the Hollow Witch and made monster faces for the camera. He was going to laugh his way through the dark. At least, that was his plan. So, you have the leader who needs to be right, the believer who is full of fear, the thinker who trusts only facts, and the jester who laughs at the dark. 4 friends, 1 forest, and a very bad idea. As they walked past the first line of trees, it was like stepping from the normal world into another one. The air changed. Outside the forest, it was just cold winter air. Inside, the air was still and thick, like the air in a basement that's been closed for years. It smelled of wet dirt and rotten wood, and something else. Something sharp and coppery, like an old penny. The cold was different too. It wasn't just the temperature. It felt like a weight. It pushed on their jackets and seemed to sneak into the gaps, touching their skin with icy fingers. But the strangest thing was the silence. Have you ever been in a forest? There are usually sounds, birds, squirrels, the buzzing of insects. But in Black Hollow, there was nothing. It was a deep, listening kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're in a library and you've just broken a rule. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you are being watched. The trees themselves were strange. They were tall and dark, and their branches were twisted like the fingers of old, bony hands. They didn't grow straight up toward the sky. They seemed to lean in toward the path, as if they were curious, as if they were waiting. They walked for 2 long hours, deeper and deeper into the quiet woods. Their voices and nervous laughter sounded loud and wrong in the heavy silence. Finally, as the last bit of light faded from the sky, they decided to set up their camp. They sat around the fire, their faces lit by the orange glow. The small circle of light felt like a tiny, safe island in a huge, dark ocean. To calm their nerves, they started talking about the very thing that scared them. They started talking about the legend, the story of the Hollow Witch. The story goes like this. A long, long time ago, before the town was even built, a woman lived in these woods. Her name was Elera. She wasn't a witch with a pointy hat and a broomstick. She was a woman who knew the forest. She knew which plants could be used for medicine, which berries were safe to eat, and how to read the seasons in the wind. The forest was her home. It was a part of her. But the people in the small villages nearby were afraid of her. They didn't understand her. When people got sick, they said Elera had cursed them. When an animal was found dead, they whispered it was Elera's dark magic. When a child wandered too far and got lost in the woods, they decided Elera had taken them. Their fear grew and grew, like a sickness itself. And one day, that fear turned into something ugly. A group of villagers marched into the woods, captured Elera, and dragged her to the center of the forest. They tied her to a huge, ancient tree with thick ropes, and they left her there. They left her to starve. They left her for the cold. They left her to die. But Elera didn't die. Not really. Her body grew weak, but her spirit, her anger, her sadness, it was too strong to just disappear. So instead of dying, she just dissolved. It was like she melted into the forest itself. Her spirit became one with the bark of trees. Her anger became the winter wind, and her sadness became the deep, dark silence. The forest took all her pain, and in return, it gave her power. They say she still lives in Black Hollow, not as a person, but as the forest itself. Like the forest is her body now, and she does not like visitors. They say she plays tricks on people's minds, making them see things that aren't there. They say she marks her land with strange symbols made of bones and stones, a warning to stay away. And they say if you ignore the warnings and stay too long, she takes you, and you become another one of her quiet, forgotten stories. That night, long after the others had fallen asleep, Mia heard it. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness of the tent. She held her breath, listening. The clicking sound came again. It was close. Then it seemed to move, sounding farther away. Then it sounded like it was right next to her ear. And then she heard something else. Laughter. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a soft, dry chuckle. It sounded like a handful of dead leaves being crushed in someone's hand. It was a sound that was completely, totally wrong. Mia shook the others awake. Her hands were trembling. They all grabbed their flashlights and scrambled out of the tent, pointing the beams of light into the dark wood. There was nothing. There was nothing. Just the silent, cold trees, standing there like tall, dark ghosts. The clicking was gone. The laughter was gone. There was only the heavy, watching silence again. Tyler made a nervous joke about raccoons. Dan checked his equipment. Sarah told everyone they were just spooked and to go back to bed. But Mia knew what she had heard. It was a knock on the door, a warning. This was their last chance. They could have packed their things right then, in the middle of the night, and run. They could have left the forest and never looked back. But they didn't. They stayed, and by staying, they accepted the invitation. The next day, the sun was a weak, white circle in the grey sky. The forest felt even stranger than before. The group decided to explore, looking for things to film for their documentary. And it wasn't long before the forest showed them something. They found it in a small, clear area where no trees grew. It was a perfect circle made of smooth, grey river stones. And in the very middle of the circle was something that made them all stop breathing. It was a star shape carefully laid out on the ground. But it wasn't made of sticks or rocks. It was made of animal bones, little skulls, long leg bones, and curved rib cages, all arranged to make a perfect 5-pointed star. It was like a very, very scary art project. And when they looked up from the bone star, they saw the trees around the clearing were decorated. Hanging from the branches on little pieces of vine were dozens of small figures. They were shaped like little people, woven together out of sticks and twigs. Each one was about the size of a person's hand, and holding them all together was hair. Long strands of human hair, black hair, brown hair, red hair, blonde hair. Dan, trying to stay calm, said it was probably just a prank by local kids. Tyler tried to laugh, but the sound got stuck in his throat. This was too weird, even for him. Mia just started to cry, soft little sobs. She tried to hide. She knew what they were looking at. They were looking at warnings. They were looking at trophies from people who had came before them. But Sarah saw something else. She lifted her camera. A strange, excited smile was on her face, and the camera's microphone picked up her whisper. "This is perfect," she said. "This is perfect for the film." That night, the forest stopped playing games. It began with a scream, then a sound that felt like it shook their bones, and then the whispering started. This time it was not outside the tent. The sound was inside with them. It was all around them. It was like 100 people were all whispering at once, right next to their ears. The words were not in English. It was a hissing, clicking language that made their skin crawl. For Tyler, the jester, this was the final straw. His shield of humor shattered into a million pieces. Overcome with a terror he could no longer joke about, he did the only thing his panicked brain could think of. He ran. He ripped open the tent flap and scrambled out into the pure blackness, screaming a high, thin scream that didn't sound like him at all. He ran away from the whispers and straight into the waiting arms of the forest. They waited for him to come back. They called his name until their throats were raw, but the only answer was the cold, listening silence. They found him the next morning. He was sitting at the bottom of a large old tree, as if he had just sat down to rest. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the grey sky, but he wasn't seeing it. His mouth was full. It was packed tight with the dark, wet mud and dead leaves and small, sharp pebbles. And his hands were gone. Both of them vanished. The panic that followed was a messy, ugly thing. Dan was crying and shouting, saying they had to leave, that they had to get out right now. But Sarah was acting strangely. The fear in her eyes was mixed with a wild, feverish excitement. "We have to film this, Dan," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to show everyone the truth. This is the story." And Mia had curled up into a small ball on the ground. She couldn't speak. She couldn't cry. It was like the fear had frozen her from the inside out. They tried to leave. They really did. Dan got out his phone to use the GPS map, but the little blue dot that showed where they were just spun around and around in a crazy circle. The forest was hiding the way out. It was playing a trick on them. They walked for hours, but every path they took just seemed to lead them back to the same strange, twisted tree they had passed before. The sky never changed. It was stuck in a dim, grey afternoon that never ended. It felt like time was broken. The forest was like a giant stomach, and it was slowly digesting them. And then it took the next one. Sarah was walking just behind Dan and Mia. Dan turned his head for just 1 second to say something to Mia. 1 second. When he turned his head back to where Sarah had been, she was gone. There was no sound, no scream, no crashing in the bushes. The spot where she had been walking was just empty. The forest hadn't grabbed her. It had simply deleted her. Now, there were only two, Mia and Dan. The camera's battery light was blinking red. They were almost out of power, almost out of time, almost out of hope. But they had saved one last video file. It was 34 minutes long. Most of it is just darkness and the sound of two scared people walking through the woods. The beginning of the file and the very end are the most important parts of this whole story. The recording begins with Dan's voice, whispering into the camera's microphone. His voice is shaky, almost broken. He is saying, "We found something, Mia. Look at the tree." He must have been pointing the camera at a tree trunk. We hear him describe it. He says there are symbols carved into the wood, the same star-shaped symbol they found at the Circle of Stones. It was a mark, a brand, the signature of the Hollow Witch. And as he was recording that symbol, they heard it again, the laughter. The soft, dry, rustling sound. But it wasn't coming from one place anymore. It was all around them. It was coming from every tree. It was whispering on the wind. It was coming from the ground beneath their feet. It was the sound of a game that was finally over. The sound of a winner enjoying her victory. And then something else happened. The little stick figures hanging in the trees, they began to move. They started to slowly sway back and forth, turning their little twig heads to look down at them. There was no wind. The camera started to shake wildly. Dan was running. We hear Mia let out one final terrible scream. And then the camera fell. Then silence. The camera just lay there in the dead leaves. A single glass eye pointing sideways at a blurry world of dirt and sticks. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The forest was still waiting. And then a new sound. A voice. It was not a scream. It was not a laugh. It was a soft, hissing whisper. spoken right into the camera's microphone, as if someone had knelt down and was sharing a secret with it. And then one final sound, the sound of something moving very slowly through the leaves, the sound of thin, dry fingers with long, sharp nails reaching for the camera. Weeks later, a pair of hikers found the camera by accident. It was tucked under the roots of a tree, covered in a thick green blanket of moss. The battery was dead. Of the 4 friends, Sarah, Mia, Dan, and Tyler, no trace was ever found. No bodies, no clothes, no footprints. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The police and other experts looked at the footage on the camera. They said it was a hoax, a very clever fake, made by some kids who wanted to be famous on the internet. Maybe they are right. But the people who live in the town near Black Hollow, they don't go into those woods anymore. Not for any reason. They know the forest is a hungry place, and sometimes you have to feed it. And they say that sometimes on a cold, still night, when the wind is quiet, if you stand at the very edge of the woods and you just listen, you can still hear voices, faint, far away, carried on the air. If this story gave you chills, imagine what's coming next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more dark tales you won't forget. Sleep tight, if you can.